All right, so we're going to look at some of the biggest questions about humanity, and we're going to look at the stages of cognitive and psychosocial development. How do we change over time? And what are those stages? And there's many theories on this, and we're going to look at the most prominent and most famous and well-respected theories, and we're going to talk about them. And you can come to your own consensus on what you think. So let's look here. So the biggest debate all starts with this debate between nature versus nurture. What shapes us, who we are over our lifetime? Is it more of our nature or our nurture? Is there a biological approach or is it a behaviorist approach? Humanism tends to be on the right. Psychoanalysis tends to be more in the nature side of it. Cognitive psychology might be more of a balance. And it depends on the scientist or the social scientist on what they see. Now, nature is our genetics, our genes, our heredity, versus nurture, which is our environment, our upbringing, our parenting. So a matronists emphasize the role of genetically programmed growth and development of the body. So matronists tend to think that we are more on the genetic side, that things happen because of our heredity. So we have these complicated questions like, why do some people go to college? Okay, and we said that the number one predictor if a student's going to go to college is if their parents went to college. Okay, well that doesn't answer the genetic versus nurture debate. If anything, it could still be, the answer could be it's both. Because if your parents went to college, you might say, oh, they're smarter, their genes and their brain is smarter, that they're just more likely, it's easier for school and learning, and they're more likely to go to college. But on the nurture side of it is, no, the parents are better educated, so they understand some of the psychology and how to bring a kid up and make sure that they're successful and that they're prepared for college and that they read and they have all these skills. So the question has never been answered, but we're getting more and more information on the nature side of it, and maybe we're getting more and more information on the nurture side. Now, the opposing position is a learning perspective that inherent to the positions are sometimes referred to as environmentalists. So you have matronists and environmentalists that think, the environmentalists tend to think it's much more on the environment side, and it's your upbringing. You could deduce and make your own opinion on this, but it is a question that will be answered maybe not soon. So let's look at how do we even research this stuff. Well, we have two types of studies that are very important. You have longitudinal studies that have the advantage of following the subject across time or even most of a person's life. There's actually been a couple documentaries that were interesting about this. Boyhood won some awards, and it was a movie where the actors were followed over 12 years, but it wasn't real. And then Hoop Dreams was a documentary where it was actually following these boys from middle school all the way up until college, and it stays with them, and it's considered one of the greatest documentary ever. It's fantastic about where they go. They're these star basketball players and how their life changes. Well, these studies and these films, there's not a lot of them because they're very, very expensive. But longitudinal studies, as we read about in the past, done by Harvard, have kind of explained what makes a person happy and live longer. And we find out that when people that live longer, they tend to have the one thing that really stood out is they had strong family and friends, relationships with family and friends above all, that there was a big environmental component to it. But also on the genetic component of it, there could be, some people have longevity in their family, that they live longer. But also is it behavioral? If you eat healthy and exercise, you're going to live longer. Now, cross-sectional studies gather information from different age groups on one particular period or piece of time. So they take snapshots of little things one at a time, and this is a great way of finding out what's happening with fifth graders. So some of these studies is that they really do look at the reading scores of fifth graders to predict incarceration rates later on in life. Because if reading skills are up, we're going to have less need for jail because there's going to be more people are educated, and they're probably going to not end up in prison, believe it or not, and it's sad to say. But it also gives a lot of other data points. Are kids learning better? Are kids learning less? Well, during the pandemic, maybe learning has really dipped. Social skills have really decreased. Well, we could do cross-sectional studies to see how's that affecting different groups and age groups specifically. So this is very important studies as well. Now we're going to get into Piaget's attempt at the science of cognitive development. So Piaget created the theory of cognitive development of children in 1936. So it's an old theory. However, a lot of it seems to have some relevance and accuracy today. Under the theory of cognitive development, children go through stages of mental development based on their age or time. So you can see at the top, you have sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and then you have formal operational. Now, Piaget tried to understand fundamental concepts like the very idea of numbers, time, quantity, casualty, which means death, justice are all a part of a person's self-awareness. And he tries to see concretely how the brain works at different age groups. And he thinks that, we're going to look at this in a second, that you could break down age groups, and it's pretty within range. Okay, the development of intelligence as a measure by an IQ test, that which is the following statement is most likely to be true. Is it A, the IQ test of parents and their offspring will be more nearly alike than the IQ scored of fraternal twins and reared together? And we've talked about studies on paternal and fraternal twins and how some of the research has been done unethically where the twins actually been separated at birth to see what happens. The IQ scores of fraternal twins reared together will be more nearly alike than the IQ score of identical twins reared together. Reared meaning upbringing or raised together. IQ scores of fraternal twins reared together will be more nearly like the IQ scores of identical twins reared apart. We said identical twins share much more DNA and similarity, and almost identical DNA than fraternal twins, which they both had separate eggs and sperm, where the identical twins had two different sperm, but they have one egg, so they share 50 exact DNA. So the IQ scores of fraternal twins will be equivalent and similar to the IQ scores of identical twins. And then finally, the IQ scores of identical twins reared apart will be more nearly alike than the IQ scores of fraternal twins reared together. So take a second, answer. And the answer is E. The IQ scores of identical twins reared apart will be more nearly like the IQ scores of fraternal twins reared together. So even though the identical twins were raised at different places, and we did this, psychologists have done this in the 70s, and they've done it unethically. A lot of people have said, we don't do this anymore, hopefully. They found out their IQs are almost exactly the same, even though they were raised in totally different environments. So there may be a big component of genes to your IQ. And fraternal twins who are raised together, their IQs aren't necessarily the same, even though they come from the same environment, because the DNA is so different. So genetics might have a really big bearing on your IQ. All right, so now, under Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development, he examines the process in which infants and the children develop into individuals who can reason and think using hypotheses, and they can make their own hypothesis one day. Children construct and understand the world around them through and between what they already know. Biologically, they have innate brain development. So you can see this is a picture of the brain developing. And actually, something like 90% of your brain development is done by the age of 5. So that's really critical to constantly stimulate, read to, and interact with kids up until 5. I'm not saying it's any less afterwards, but that's really critical and what they discover in their environment. And you can see how rapidly the brain develops. And the neurons and the cells are building really sharply, especially up until age 5. And then it's constant, but the growth is not as fast. Piaget is interesting because he was a scientist. He really was not a psychologist. But in fairness, a lot of people weren't psychologists at the turn of the 19th century, other than like the Freudian schools. Now, Jerome Bruner creates this idea of a schema. He says that there are building blocks of knowledge or cognitive models that enable us to form a mental representation of the world. So, as you can see in the top left-hand corner, when I say sports car, in your mind, what do you see? Do you picture something moving fast, expensive, small, shiny. Do you see all these things when you think of a sports car? Well, that's a schema. You're building a model in your head, okay? And if I show you something, and I said chair, a student might say, okay, they might picture a chair with a desk on it because they're at school at the time, where an adult might picture just a chair with four legs on it because they're not at school or they don't sit at a desk. Depending on your experience, your schema might be different or what you've taught. But schemas can also be about people. You have projection, tall people are friendly, are nice, and you can build schemas. Now, Piaget's development theory is based on the concept of equilibration, and equilibration is a child's attempt to reach a balance between what the child encounters in the environment and the cognitive structure the child brings to the situation. So you're trying to equalize, and he's trying to balance out these two worlds. Here's my environment, and here's the structure that the situation I'm going to bring together. So children try to equilibration through simulation, incorporating new ideas in the existing schemas. So I have a new idea. I have to assimilate it into my old ideas. This can be very challenging. And this is also called accommodating. When we face information that does not easily fit into the schema, the child must modify the schema and include the new information to process accommodate. So accommodation is when it's like really trying to bring something new. So I've seen cars, I've seen lots of cars, I've never seen a truck. Well, what is a truck then? Okay, well, it's kind of like a car and a plane. It's bigger than a car, but that it's open in the back. It's something totally different. So I might say it like a car plane or something. I might start creating these, taking what I know and putting it together. That's accommodating. I'm assimilating ideas that I don't understand with new ideas I do understand, and I'm accommodating. And this is also might be a little bit easier, especially when it comes to people, for younger people and kids to accommodate because our brains are maybe a little bit more active and designed this way. When we get older, it might be harder to accommodate something that goes against our schemas, our already created this strong view of what something is. How are you going to go against that? I'm 70 years old. I've seen it all my life. So children tend to maybe develop quicker in this way. All right. So now we've got the stages. You got sensory motor stage, which is infants, birth, 2 to 2 years. They have problems with object permanence. We talked about knowing that the object is still existing, even if it's hidden, because they have problems creating a schema, a mental representation of the object. So if I hold up a teddy bear and you guys see a yellow teddy bear, you could picture it in your head. Now, if I put a book in front of it or I put the door in front of it, in sensory motor skills, which means like the kid senses, smells, hears, feels, and they're trying to coordinate their hands and their mouth and touch and everything, they might not be able to picture the bear. Once you put the door in front, they're like, where'd it go? Where'd it go? Where'd it go? And you know the famous game of peekaboo. And then it comes down, they're like, they think it's so funny. Like babies are very quick to start smiling. Also, the sensory motor, we know that the first sense to really develop is hearing, because they're used to hearing the mother's voice and the father's voice. That's very important to keep them safe. So, and they need to know where to go to get food, to get milk. Now, the second stage is pre-operational stage. That's toddlers, the early childhood, 2 to 7 years. Young children are unable to think about things symbolically. This is the ability to make one thing, a word, or an object stand for something other than itself. So they're starting to learn words, and they're starting to understand that door means a big wooden thing with a handle on it. Door, okay? Because words are symbols, exactly what they are. And the sounds door in our language represent our symbol for a hard piece of wood with a handle on it, as usually, that's the schema I have in my mind. Other characteristics of the stage, they start using words as substitute for objects, is their egocentrism. They see the world in terms of their own point of view, is his argument. Their artificialism, they believe that all things are human-made, and then animism, that all things have a spirit. So everything's made by human beings. It's hard for me to understand, what other people are going through. So I want that toy, boom, you hit the other kid. That's very typical of toddler. Well, the kid starts crying. Well, that's the teacher. That's why it's so important in this stage to get good education and to have good guides, teachers and parents that are telling you, look at the kid. Look at how you made them feel. You made them hurt. And then they hit you and you say, oh, you hurt daddy. You hurt mommy. You're teaching them empathy. They're struggling with that idea, according to Piaget at this stage. And I don't know. Maybe they can move through it quicker than 2 to 7 years. Artificialism, everything's made by human beings. There's not really understanding anything outside of that. Everything's alive. You think animism was the ritual and the belief systems of the indigenous Americans, indigenous tribes. Everything has a spirit like a tree. Everything has some kind of, it's alive, okay? And then he thinks that their egocentric abilities, the infinite has difficulty taking the viewpoint of others. Can you understand how that makes me feel when you hit me or you take my toy? And you have to teach them that. And the question is, can they get out of this pre-operational stage? All right, now we got concrete operational stage, which is elementary to early adolescence, 7 to 11-year-olds. Now, he considered concrete stage a major turning point in children's cognitive development because it marks the beginning of logical operational ability to perform mental operations, the reverse thinking. The concept is called reversibility. Another concept is conservation, the idea that the amount of a substance does not change just because you arrange it. So in concrete operational, kids could do, one of the experiments we looked at is you could put juice in 2 cups, and it's the exact same amount of juice, and they're the same kind of cup, and then you could dump one of them into a taller cup. In the pre-operational, the kids would be like, the taller cup has more fluid. No, in concrete operation, they can understand that the volume of the liquid did not change just because you put it in a different shape of a glass. So that's very important. Or money. They put the 5 quarters on the table and they're next to each other. They said, I got 5 here, I got 5 here. But then you spread out some of the quarters, and then the kids would be like, whoa, which one has more? And they'd be like, well, that one has more, which was the quarters were spread out further. So conservation is the understanding that something stays the same in quality even though its appearance changes. 4, formal operational stages, adolescence and adulthood, 11 years and over, people develop the ability to think abstractly and logically. So this is where we start saying middle school. Like a lot of times we put 6th graders in middle school, and there's an argument over that. Because then you can start testing your hypothesis. They are capable of metacognition. You're capable of thinking about your thinking and your own processes and adapt to the processes that aren't successful. So the metacognition is super important. Why am I not doing good in this class? Or me as a teacher, I'm going, why are my students not doing well? I gave them a quiz, they didn't do well. So what variables or factors affected the students doing well on the quiz? Well, maybe I did too much lecture. Or maybe we didn't do enough hands-on stuff. Or what are some other factors? Well, some kids weren't here at school, so that's really hard to catch up on. What are some other factors? They do all kinds of, there's other factors. So can I reason through what did I do that might have affected the students doing well? And then on the other side, at adolescence, can students start being like, I didn't study for that quiz. I didn't put any effort in it. That's why I didn't do well. Or I didn't practice. Or I didn't look at the guide. Or I didn't watch any ed puzzles or flip videos. So that's how formal operational stage happens. And you can see there's sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, formal operational, 12 to 15, and then you just kind of stay in that according to Piaget. Interesting theory.